What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's my team selection for Game Week 36, which is of course a double game week. So I'm going to take you through how the team is looking, thoughts on transfers, captaincy, and also benching dilemmas this week, because I currently have Trent on my bench and I'm not really happy about it whatsoever. So I'm going to discuss all of that in a minute. Before we get into it, let's quickly talk about how I did in Game Week 35. So it was just a pretty bad week overall, and I got 37 points. So it wasn't great whatsoever. And unfortunately, the green arrow streak has now come to an end. So I was on a run of 11 green arrows in a row. I did get a red arrow this week, even though it was a tiny one. So I went from 40,001st to 40,408. So I dropped 407 places. I probably needed just 1 point from anyone. Just one extra point would have probably got me a green arrow, but it wasn't to be. I guess as the cliche goes in FPL, it was a good week to have a bad week because no one else really did amazing. If you got 50 or more points, then you probably had a pretty big green arrow. But there weren't too many super high-owned players that I don't have that did well. I guess the most frustrating thing for me, apart from Edison, which we'll come on to in a minute, is probably Solly March getting benched again. Then he comes on, looks like one of the best players on the pitch, certainly for Brighton, pulls up with a hamstring injury, and then McAllister also scores in that game as well. That was really the final nail in the coffin. As soon as that happened, that was the green arrow gone. So it was super close. It is what it is. The only three players that returned were Trent, Salah and Matoma. Most of them are quite highly owned anyway. Everyone else blanked, including Haaland against Leeds. Another day he comes away with 1 or 2 goals, but it doesn't really matter because he's so highly owned. And then as it is every week, one of the biggest frustrations is just Edison. And look, when I first bought him in, and Man City were defending well, but they were conceding from like their first shot on target. It was quite funny. Now it's just getting super frustrating because I've got Kepa on the bench. I see Chelsea concede. I'm thinking to myself, here we go. This is the opportunity for Edison to finally outscore him. And I watched the first half. I didn't watch the second half. I took the dog for a walk. Halfway round, we stopped at a pub to get a drink. I checked my phone. By the way, people were kind of a little bit shocked by this. I don't use the FPL app. I was checking on the website on my phone, and Edison had the clean sheet, right? So I had 10 points in total, 4 from Haaland, 6 from Edison. 83 minutes. I'm thinking they've not got long to go. Surely they can keep Leeds out. I flick up on my phone to get rid of the website. I click the Twitter app, load that up, and all I see on my timeline is Gundogan's missed a penalty and Rodrigo has scored. So I'm thinking, what has happened? Haaland's on the pitch. Why is he not taking the penalty? Obviously, Gundogan was on a hat-trick. And then almost straight away, Rodrigo's gone down the other end and scored. So I had to kind of laugh. I'm also like, Edison, come on, help me out a little bit here. And I think Big Man Bakar put a tweet out about how many the lack of points he's got in games where Man City have conceded hardly any chances. And look, I do think part of that, issue is probably Edison. There are probably some, goals there that he should be saving. But overall, it does feel a tad unlucky for the limited amount of points he's had compared to how good that Man City defence has been. But look, it is what it is. He's not going anywhere from my team as long as he keeps playing. And I just got to hope in the next kind of 3 to 4 games that Man City have that maybe he keeps 1 clean sheet. That's all I'm asking for now. Before the end of the season, just 1 clean sheet. And maybe that'll make me not happy, but it won't feel quite as bad. Because if he goes 4 out of 4 games now without a clean sheet, that won't be great. So yeah, Edison, you've been awful in my FPL team. This week, most of my players were awful. Let's take a look at Game Week 36. So going into Game Week 36, I've got 2 free transfers, and my current plan is to use 1 this week, 1 in Game Week 37, and hopefully get to Game Week 38 with those 2 free transfers still intact. And the reason for that is everyone kicks off at the same time on the final day of the season. There's no double game weeks to worry about. Because of those kickoffs, we're much more likely to get multiple team leagues, but it also gives me the flexibility to move funds around if I want to, or potentially even take some punts as well. So that's the rough plan as it stands. In terms of the 1 transfer this week, it's not going to be on any of my defenders. The only talking point really is whether I play Estupiñán or Trent Alexander-Arnold. Now, some people have said if you really want to play both of them, given that they are quite attacking, obviously Trent more so than Estupiñán, but they are fairly attacking both of them, why don't you bench Botman instead, who doesn't have any attacking threat? And I do get that argument, but I feel like Leeds away and Brighton at home is the potential to get one clean sheet for Newcastle. Could they get one clean sheet in this double? I think it's possible, even though they've had a lack of them recently. And if they do, and then you add the appearance points from the other game, you're suddenly looking at kind of 7 to 8 points for Botman, and that would probably be enough to warrant playing him, with the hope he would obviously get more than that. Now, I looked earlier at Newcastle clean sheets. As we know, they've been hard to come by, right? We've continued to play Trippier. He continues to get 2 or 1 points in most games. Their last clean sheet was Man United at home in game week 29. Before that, it was Crystal Palace away in game week 21. So there hasn't been a huge amount of defensive returns for Newcastle, but they have continued to defend pretty well. So 1.2 expected goals conceded against Arsenal, one of the best attacks in the league. That's not that bad. 0.83 against Southampton, 0.66 against Everton. I think I spoke about this last week. There are some games that stick out where they conceded a lot of chances, like against Villa and Brentford, but ultimately over the last kind of 8 to 10 game weeks, they have continued to defend pretty well. They just haven't had the clean sheets to go alongside it. It's a bit like the Man City situation with Ederson. If you go and look at all the games he hasn't got a clean sheet in, they really have limited the amount of chances. So I haven't lost complete faith in the Newcastle defence, which is why I'm happy to play Botman. He's not really a consideration for benching for me. And Luke Shaw's not really part of the conversation either. I know that's a good chance of a clean sheet, but if he's playing centre-back, you're really looking at bonus rather than attacking return. Rather than attacking return. So I'm kind of not happy to bench him, but he's not really part of the conversation for me. Between Estupiñán and Trent, I do find it really tricky because I hate benching double game week players, as I said yesterday. But so many people are talking about playing Trent, right? Not just content creators, but generally on Twitter and in my YouTube members' Discord and stuff like that. Everybody seems to be playing Trent, and it's making me think, do I have it wrong? Now, I get it, right? Brighton are probably going to concede in both of those games, so clean sheet is very hard to come by. Then you're relying on attacking returns. But I do think that Leicester will score against Liverpool as well. So then Trent is just relying on attacking returns too. Now, to be fair, he has been attacking extremely well recently. His underlying numbers have always been good, but especially since he's been moved into midfield. So does he have the chance to get more attacking returns in one game than Estupiñán does in two? Possibly. There is other things to think about as well. As I mentioned yesterday, Arsenal and Newcastle fully capable of scoring 2 or more goals. So suddenly it's not just appearance points for Estupiñán, he's losing points from goals conceded, but also he's playing 2 very good defences. So those attacking returns are then a little bit harder to come by as well. At least with Trent, we know how open Leicester can be. So I'm finding it difficult to stick to my rule of always playing the double game weeker, but that's right now how it's set up. The other thing that's playing on my mind, 2 things actually, and none are logical in terms of the decision whatsoever, but I've got previous with Trent against Leicester. Like 3 or 4 seasons ago, I sold him before Leicester away. Not only did they win 4-0, so he got a clean sheet, he had a hand in every single goal and walked away with a 24-point. Now, that was seasons ago, right? Different Liverpool team, different Leicester team, but that is playing on my mind. And also, the other thing, again, this is not logical. Don't base decisions on this whatsoever. I look at the fixtures, the way they fall for game week 36, and Estupiñán's playing on Sunday at 4:30. If he's lost a clean sheet and Arsenal have scored at least 2 goals or more and he's coming away with a 0 or 1 pointer, then I've got to go and watch Trent against Leicester. And don't get me wrong, I fully expect Leicester to concede. So if they do, the chances of Trent getting a attacking return are pretty good. That's not going to feel that fun, having to wait until Thursday to see if Estupiñán can nick a clean sheet against Arsenal, which I just don't... against Newcastle, which I just don't think is going to happen. So as you can tell, the pressure is building on this decision, and I think by the time we get to the deadline, I'm going to falter, and I'm probably going to play Trent instead. I just think there's so much noise now, and it's not that I just want to go with what the crowd is saying or doing, but are they just all doing that because that's the correct way to go? I've spoken about this before, that sometimes if a lot of people are talking about a decision, you should question whether you've definitely got it right, and I know with those 2 away games, I might not have it right. So I don't know, it's a little bit worrying. I like to think that I'm going to play Estupiñán. but I probably am going to falter at the last minute and probably switch it. So, I don't know. Let me know below. Are any of you playing your Brighton defender over Trent? Because right now it feels like there's hardly anyone out there actually doing that. In terms of goalkeeper, just really quickly, I'm playing Kepa because he's got the home game. If Edison had Nottingham Forest at home and Kepa had Everton away, I'd play Edison instead. So not too much to think about there. For game week 37, they've both got a double. I'll probably play Edison unless I get slight worries about Ortega, but we can discuss that next week. So I'm playing Botman. I'm currently playing Estepinian. I feel like Trent might come in though. So apart from the yellow flag for March, my midfield is pretty settled as it has been for a little while. So Mitoma, Salah, Rashford and Fernandes probably not going anywhere. I think in general, people might be a little bit too overly worried about Brighton players off the back of that result against Everton, which wasn't great whatsoever. And I completely understand not wanting to play a Brighton defender this week because that is two difficult fixtures. But I'm not really worried about their attackers whatsoever. I think they'll cause Arsenal and Newcastle problems. And can they score 2 to 4 goals across this double game week? I think they can. And realistically, where are we going to go with the likes of Mitoma anyway, unless you've got loads of money in the bank? So he's got to stay for me. Obviously, there is maybe the risk of rotation because Brighton are about to play 4 games and having to play them every 3 to 4 days, which they're not necessarily used to. But I think he probably misses 1 at most. So if I can get 3 out of the next 4, I'm perfectly fine with keeping him. So he's not going anywhere. I'll come back onto March in a minute, but in some ways, the fact that I probably have to transfer him out this week, that's kind of helped me because it means I can leave my decision on the third Man City player until next week. So I've got Edison on the bench this week. I can play him next. And obviously I've got Haaland as well. I was originally thinking this week of doing Trent to a Man City defender just because I didn't really have anything else to do. But next week now, I can either get a City defender in, and that can be my third player, or I can potentially do Salah to De Bruyne. Now, I love Salah, you know that, and they've got Southampton away final day of the season, so I'll probably keep hold of him, but at least I've now got that option. But for this week, I've got to keep him, right? It's Leicester away. I'm talking about Brighton scoring 2 to 4 goals across the double. Liverpool could do that in just one game against Leicester, so he's definitely staying. With Rashford and Fernandes, I am worried about Man United in general. I think the Champions League place is now becoming, too close for comfort. Liverpool could chase them down. I just think with 3 home games in the last 4, Wolves, Chelsea and Fulham on the final day, and obviously Bournemouth away as part of the double in 37, I can't get rid of a nailed-on Rashford and Fernandes. Apart from the FA Cup, Man United have got nothing else to worry about, and the FA Cup final is 6 days after the final day of the season. So in terms of minutes, those two are about as good as it's going to get, and Wolves at home is a good fixture, and next week is a double game week, so just no point in using transfers on them. So then we come back to March, and because my team is so well set up, I'm probably just going to transfer him out, and you can probably guess who for, because I've got 0.5 million in the bank. It's boring, Alexis McAllister, but I just don't see where else I go. And some people might say, do something fun, you've got 2 free transfers, get some funds from elsewhere, but it would just be hurting my team for the sake of it. And this is the problem, which I've spoken about a lot over the last few weeks, of having multiple double game weeks for the same teams. It kind of locks you into certain decisions. So if I wanted to go March to an Arsenal midfielder, for example, okay, I could do that, but I'm getting 2 fixtures, whereas McAllister's got 4. And also I'm having to fund that by selling someone that I don't really want to sell, who's probably got a double game week this week or next week. So it is a very boring end to the season for my team. But I feel like this is the obvious transfer, and sometimes you've just got to take it. So at some point this week, McAllister's probably going to go up in price and March is going to drop, but I can still afford the move if that happens. So I'm just deciding whether to do this move tonight and avoid the price changes, or just give myself until Friday to see what gets said in the press conferences. But when March has pulled up with a hamstring issue, I find it hard to believe that he'd be back this week. So there's just no point in taking the risk with him. I'll just get McAllister instead. Obviously, I could just play Trent and bench March, but then I'm burning a transfer. I could do like a Kepa or an Edison downgrade, but I just don't think it's worth it when they've both got a double next week. Let's say Ortega plays against Everton and suddenly I'm worried about Edison playing both in the double. Well, then I'll just play Kepa instead. So I kind of want to leave that option open. So March to McAllister is almost certainly going to be my move this week because I just don't see a better one. Like a punt on Buonanotte when I've got someone that's nailed, good minutes, takes penalties, at some point might play further advance as well. I just don't know why I wouldn't take it. It's not like I've got millions in the bank. I've literally got 0.5 million. So that is almost certainly going to be my move. And then up front, it's Haaland and Isak with Greenwood on the bench. Now, with Haaland in particular, I've seen people speculating about possible rotation against Everton for Man City, because obviously they got the second leg against Real Madrid on Wednesday. And I think there will be some rotation, but maybe not quite as much as people are expecting. So I could see Mahrez in for Bernardo Silva, for example. Maybe Foden in for Grealish again. Alvarez has got probably a good chance of starting, but I think it would be instead of De Bruyne rather than instead of Haaland. And it's worth saying, Haaland still has not been rested when he's been fit in the league. He started every single game when he's been available. And I think Arsenal beating Newcastle 2-0 is probably going to reduce the rotation a little bit. I think it's much more likely that Pep tries to get the game won and then brings players off early. If Newcastle had beaten Arsenal, that might have taken a little bit of the pressure off. So I'm expecting Haaland to start. I also think in the grand scheme of things, it just doesn't matter because the game is on Sunday. We're not going to get that early team leak like we did last week. And who's prepared to risk him being on the bench, right? We're going to start him because if he does play against Everton, we know the damage he can do. And if he gets benched and plays 0 minutes, well, happy days. Most of us have got a great bench anyway. So I'm starting Haaland. With Isak, he's probably going to be my captain. I do want to captain a double game week player. And as you'll know from watching my videos this week, my confidence levels in Isak starting against Leeds and getting good minutes against Brighton are pretty high. I think as I get towards the deadline, I will start panicking a little bit about the potential for Wilson to start against Leeds and Isak to be benched. But it just seems really unlikely. Honestly, you go and read any Newcastle kind of fan accounts that aren't really FPL players, they all predict Isak to start. And in a lot of cases, they predict him to be the number 9 up front. Now, you got to be careful with fans because sometimes, and I know this from a Man United point of view, we talk about what we'd like to see instead of what's likely to happen. But either way, I think Isak starts against Leeds and I think he gets minutes against Brighton, so he'll be my captain. In the unlikely event, I guess it's possible, Isak is benched against Leeds and Wilson starts. That does make things difficult for me. Now, as it stands, I'll just show you on here. As it stands, I can afford March to McAllister, wherever he is. Let me just type this in. And Isak to Wilson. So if Isak doesn't start against Leeds and Wilson does, I could then bring Wilson in to captain him. The problem is I can only just afford that. So any price changes would stop me from being able to make both of those moves. I also don't really want to use both of my free transfers because if I bring Wilson in, I'm then worried about whether he plays against Brighton or whether he plays against Leicester as well. I could potentially just bench him for 37, then sell him in 38. I just don't feel like that's a move. It doesn't stand out as a move I really want to make. I'm kind of mostly... Gut instinct is that I shouldn't do it. So if Isak doesn't start, I think all that changes for me is I switch the armband to Trippier instead, which I know is going to sound crazy to a lot of people, but I do think there's a shot at 1 clean sheet. If they get a clean sheet, he's great for bonus. So you're looking at maybe 7 to 9 points. Then you've got attacking potential on top of that. He could come away with a pretty decent score. So I really want to captain Isak. And if he starts against Leeds and so does Wilson, I'm still going to captain Isak, even though when they both play, Wilson's the I would say slightly better option, right? You could say massively better option, fair enough. But I then think that Isak's much more likely to start against Brighton if they both play against Leeds, which is probably the better fixture on paper. So that is my plan. March to McAllister, captain Isak, and if Wilson starts and Isak doesn't, I'll probably just switch the armband to Trippier, maybe to Matoma instead. Let me know what you think about all those plans. Let me know, like I said earlier, is anyone benching Trent for a Brighton defender, or is it just me at this stage? In which case, maybe I should just swap before the deadline. If you enjoyed that video, give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll catch you again tomorrow.